Greedy heirs stripped the billionaire's mansion of every dime, laughing as they tossed a loyal caretaker a filthy, moth-eaten rug for her severance. But as she knelt in the empty study to roll up the insulting parting gift, the floorboards gave way, revealing a steel vault they completely missed. Rain battered the towering stained-glass windows of Hawthorne Manor, casting fractured, melancholic shadows across the grand foyer. For 22 years, Clara Harrington had walked these sprawling, silent halls. She knew the exact floorboards that creaked the precise angle to adjust the thermostat, so the ancient pipes wouldn't rattle, and exactly how the eccentric billionaire Reginald Hawthorne liked his Earl Grey tea, brewed 3 minutes and 30 seconds, not a second longer. She had arrived as a young, desperate housekeeper, and slowly morphed into Reginald's estate manager, confidant, and sole caretaker during his agonizing, drawn-out battle with pulmonary fibrosis. Reginald was a titan of industry, a man who had amassed a fortune in rare antiquities and maritime shipping, yet he died in his ornate mahogany bed with only Clara holding his frail hand. His actual blood relatives had not visited in over a decade, but the moment the silver-haired billionaire took his final rattling breath, the vultures began circling. Less than 48 hours after Reginald's passing, the heavy oak doors of Hawthorne Manor were violently thrown open. Preston Gallagher and Sylvia Caldwell, Reginald's nephew and niece, stormed into the foyer, bringing with them a biting winter draught and an air of venomous entitlement. Preston, a failing real estate developer, drowning in undisclosed debts, wore a bespoke Italian suit that couldn't hide his nervous, sweaty disposition. Sylvia, a notoriously volatile socialite, whose gambling addictions were the worst-kept secret in Manhattan, trailed behind him, her sharp heels clicking against the imported marble like a metronome of impending doom. They did not ask Clara how her late employer had passed. They did not ask if he had suffered. They did not even bother to look at the tasteful floral arrangements Clara had paid for out of her own meager savings. Instead, Preston marched directly into the grand drawing room, his eyes scanning the priceless art on the walls with predatory hunger. Behind them walked a nervous, balding man, clutching a leather briefcase, Mr. Harrison, the probate attorney. "We are freezing all accounts," Preston announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, dripping with arrogance. "As the direct next of kin and executors of the temporary estate trust, we are taking immediate inventory. No one leaves this property with so much as a silver spoon." Clara stood near the sweeping staircase, her hands folded neatly in front of her black uniform. Her eyes were red-rimmed from 2 sleepless nights of mourning, but she maintained her dignified posture. "Mr. Gallagher, Miss Caldwell, I am deeply sorry for your loss." "Mr. Mauafoji, Hawthorne wanted you both to know." "Save it, Clara," Sylvia snapped, waving a manicured hand dismissively. She didn't even make eye contact. "We know exactly what my crazy uncle thought of us, and frankly we don't care. Where is the master safe?" "The one he kept the bearer bonds and the unrecorded cash in." For the next 4 hours, Clara watched in quiet horror as the 2 heirs tore the majestic estate apart. They possessed no reverence for the history of the house. They ripped 17th-century tapestries from the walls, searching for hidden compartments. They dumped Reginald's meticulously organized filing cabinets onto the floor, scattering decades of personal correspondence. Finally, behind a portrait of Reginald's late wife in the master bedroom, Preston found it the primary wall safe. Using a master combination, they had coerced out of Mr. Harrison. Preston spun the heavy steel dial. The heavy door swung open to reveal the liquid lifeblood of Reginald Hawthorne's empire. Stacks of crisp-bound $100 bills, thick manila envelopes stuffed with high-yield municipal bearer bonds, velvet pouches heavy with uncut diamonds and heirloom jewelry, millions of dollars in untraceable liquid assets. Preston and Sylvia descended upon the safe like starved wolves. They frantically stuffed the cash bonds and jewels into designer duffel bags they had brought specifically for this purpose. Watching from the doorway, Clara finally spoke up. Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. "Excuse me." Before he passed, Mr. Hawthorne explicitly stated that I was to receive a pension. We had an agreement. I gave 22 years of my life to this house. He promised I would be taken care of. Preston zipped up a bulging duffel bag, pausing to look at Clara. A cruel, mocking smirk spread across his face. He exchanged a glance with Sylvia, who let out a sharp, breathless laugh. "An agreement!" Preston scoffed, stepping closer to Clara, towering over her. "Is it in writing? Is there a notarized contract, Clara?" He was working on codicils with his lawyer before the final stroke, Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He promised me $50,000 a year and the deed to the small guest cottage. It was a verbal promise witnessed by the hospice nurse." A verbal promise from a dying man heavily medicated on morphine means absolutely nothing, Sylvia sneered, adjusting her silk scarf. "You were an employee, a maid who got comfortable. You've been paid your weekly wages. As of right now, your employment is terminated. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your miserable little room in the servants' quarters and vacate the premises." Clara felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Panic and betrayal choked her throat. "I have nowhere to go. I spent my entire savings paying for his specialized oxygen equipment when his accounts were temporarily frozen last month. You can't just throw me out with nothing." Preston's eyes darted around the room, landing on Reginald's private study down the hall. He smirked and walked toward it, gesturing for Clara to follow. The study was the one room they hadn't completely destroyed, mostly because it contained nothing but old books and a massive, incredibly heavy, faded Persian Tabriz rug that spanned nearly the entire floor. It was ancient, stained with ink from Reginald's fountain pens, and reeked of cedar and old dust. "Tell you what, Clara," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Because we are generous people, we'll give you a severance bonus. You can take this rug. It's filthy, it's heavy, and I was going to pay someone to haul it to the dump anyway. Take it. Sell it at a flea market for $20 and get off my property." Sylvia giggled, clutching a bag containing $2 million in diamonds. "Don't say we never gave you anything, Clara. Now pack your things. The security guards will escort you out in 60 minutes. They brushed past her, their bags heavy with a stolen fortune, leaving Clara standing alone in the doorway of the study. The cruelty of their laughter echoed down the marble hallway, followed by the heavy slam of the front door. Clara fell to her knees, staring at the ugly, heavy rug, tears of absolute despair finally spilling down her cheeks. Silence settled over Hawthorne Manor, heavy and suffocating. The grand house, once filled with the ticking of grandfather clocks and the soft hum of Reginald's classical music, now felt like a plundered tomb. Clara remained on her knees in the doorway of the study, the rough fibers of the ancient Persian rug scratching against her bare hands. She had exactly 55 minutes before the private security firm Preston had hired would arrive to forcibly remove her from the only home she had known for over 2 decades. Rage, hot and blinding, began to replace her sorrow. She thought about the 22 Christmases she had spent decorating the manor, while Preston and Sylvia ignored Reginald's invitations. She thought about the endless nights sitting up monitoring Reginald's oxygen levels, while his niece and nephew partied on yachts funded by their uncle's stipends. And now they had walked away with millions, leaving her with a literal pile of dirt-caked wool. Clara stood up, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. She was not a woman who broke easily. If Preston Gallagher told her to take the rug, she was going to take the damn rug. Perhaps a specialized antique dealer might give her a few $100s for it. It would be enough for a cheap motel room while she figured out how to rebuild her shattered life. She walked to the far corner of the massive study. The Tabriz rug was incredibly thick, woven with dark crimsons, deep navy blues and intricate geometric medallions that had long since faded under the sunlight pouring through the bay windows. Reginald had always been strangely obsessive about this rug. He never allowed the professional cleaning service to touch it. He insisted Clara vacuum it personally, using a low-suction attachment, and he strictly forbade anyone from moving the heavy oak desk that sat near its center. Clara began to push the heavy oak desk off the rug. It shrieked in protest against the floorboards, fighting her every inch of the way. Panting and sweating, she finally managed to shove it onto the bare wood. Then she knelt and grabbed the thick, fringed edge of the heavy carpet. She started to roll it. It was like rolling a dead weight. Dust motes exploded into the air, dancing in the pale shafts of afternoon sunlight. Coughing, she pushed the heavy cylinder of wool forward, rolling it toward the center of the room. The underbelly of the rug was stiff and rigid, cracking slightly as it curled upon itself. As she rolled it past the center point, right where Reginald's chair used to sit, the heavy fabric caught on something. Clara frowned, pulling harder. There was a sharp, metallic scraping sound. She stopped and looked down at the exposed floor. The hardwood planks here looked different from the rest of the room. They weren't oak. They were cleverly painted steel slats, designed to perfectly mimic the grain of the surrounding wood. But what made Clara's breath hitch in her throat was the heavy, recessed brass ring sitting flush with the floor, surrounded by a complex, heavy-duty rotary combination dial. It was a floor vault. Clara froze, staring at the cold, unyielding metal. Preston and Sylvia had spent hours tearing the walls apart, ripping paintings down, entirely unaware that the most secure vault in the house was beneath the very rug they had mockingly given away. Her mind raced. A combination? She didn't have a combination. Reginald had never mentioned a floor safe, nor had he ever given her a string of numbers. Or had he? Suddenly a memory slammed into her with the force of a freight train. 3 weeks ago, Reginald had been confined to his bed, his breathing shallow and labored. He had gripped Clara's wrist with surprising strength, pressing a small, heavy brass key into her palm. "The storm is coming, Clara." He had wheezed, his eyes cloudy but intensely focused. "When the wolves come to strip the meat from the bones, remember the year my beloved Eleanor was born and the day we were married. Keep the key. Do not tell the lawyer. Do not tell my wretched nephew. For a rainy day, Clara." Clara had assumed it was the key to an old safety deposit box at a bank. She had put it on her keychain and completely forgotten about it amidst the chaos of his declining health. Her hands shaking violently, Clara reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out her heavy ring of keys. There, nestled between the key to the pantry and the key to the back door, was the heavy brass key Reginald had given her. She dropped to her knees beside the dial, the year Eleanor was born and the day they were married. Clara knew these dates by heart. She had ordered the flowers for Eleanor's grave every single year. Eleanor was born in 1942. They were married on October 14th. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Clara grasped the cold brass dial. She spun it right to 19, left to 42, right to 10, left to 14. She heard a heavy, satisfying mechanical click echo beneath the floorboards, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Clara inserted the brass key into the recessed slot beside the dial. It slid in perfectly. She turned it clockwise. A series of heavy steel locking bolts retracted with a loud industrial thud that reverberated through the silent mansion. Clara grabbed the brass ring with both hands and pulled upward. The heavy steel door groaned as it lifted on hydraulic hinges, revealing a dark, meticulously organized chasm beneath the floor. A rush of cool, cedar-scented air hit her face. Clara leaned over the edge, peering into the hidden depths of the vault. When her eyes finally adjusted to the shadows, all the breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. Preston and Sylvia had robbed the wall safe, thinking they had found the prize. They had no idea that what they took was merely Reginald's pocket change. What lay beneath the ugly, moth-eaten rug was a secret that was about to rewrite Clara's destiny and destroy the greedy heirs forever. Golden light filtered through the towering bay windows, illuminating the hidden depths of the steel floor vault, and Clara Harrington could hardly believe her eyes. Neatly stacked in the center of the reinforced chamber were rows upon rows of pure, heavy gold bullion. Each bar caught the ambient light gleaming with a heavy, intoxicating luster that seemed completely out of place in the dusty, neglected study. But the gold, staggering as it was in value, was only the beginning. Surrounding the glowing stacks of metal were thick, vacuum-sealed plastic bags filled with immaculate sequential bundles of high-denomination euros and Swiss francs. Beside them rested 3 heavy leather-bound ledgers, their spines embossed with the discreet logos of prestigious offshore banking institutions in Zurich and the Cayman Islands. Reginald Hawthorne had not just hidden his wealth, he had buried an entirely separate, invisible financial empire right beneath his desk. Trembling, Clara reached into the cold depths of the vault. Her fingers bypassed the gold and the stacks of foreign currency, drawn instead to a thick, wax-sealed manila envelope resting atop a mahogany lockbox. The heavy crimson wax bore Reginald's personal signet ring impression. Written across the front of the envelope in Reginald's distinctively sharp, spidery handwriting were 3 words for Clara Harrington. With her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, she broke the wax seal. Inside was a handwritten letter pinned to a stack of crisp legal documents bordered in heavy blue ink. She unfolded the parchment, her eyes scanning the familiar, elegant script. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, it means my time has passed, and my utterly predictable blood-sucking relatives have descended upon Hawthorne Manor exactly as I anticipated. I have no doubt Preston and Sylvia have pillaged the wall safe in my bedroom. Let them have it. The cash and jewels inside that safe are heavily documented, sequentially marked, and legally bound to a charitable trust. By taking those items before the probate period concludes, they have unwittingly committed grand larceny and federal tax evasion. Clara gasped, a sudden breathless laugh escaping her lips as tears pricked her eyes. Reginald had known. He had orchestrated the entire scenario from his deathbed, setting a magnificent, invisible trap for the heirs who had abandoned him. The letter continued. Beneath this envelope, you will find my true, legally binding final will and testament, notarized by my private counsel, Harold Montgomery. Do not trust Harrison. He was easily bought by Preston, just as I predicted. This new will supersedes all previous documents. It leaves the entirety of my estate, the manor, the offshore accounts, the liquid assets, and everything within this vault to you, Clara. You were the only family I had left. Now close the vault, take these documents, and leave the house. Let them think they have won. Then unleash hell upon them. A heavy metallic thud echoed from the front of the massive house. The private security team had arrived. Panic seized Clara's chest. She had less than 10 minutes before armed men would be standing in this very room to throw her out onto the street. She could not possibly carry the gold bars, nor could she carry the stacks of foreign currency without arousing immediate suspicion. She had to be smart. She had to be tactical. Working with frantic, desperate speed, Clara stuffed the leather-bound banking ledgers, the mahogany lockbox, and the thick stack of legal documents deep into her canvas duffel bag, burying them underneath her folded uniforms and personal toiletries. She took one last look at the staggering fortune of gold left behind, knowing it would be perfectly safe. She slammed the heavy steel door of the vault shut. The hydraulic hinges hissed, and the locking bolts automatically engaged with a loud final clack. She spun the brass dial wildly, scrambling the combination, and then grabbed the heavy edge of the Persian Tabriz rug. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she violently unrolled the ancient carpet, dragging it back over the hidden floor safe, just as heavy boots began to echo down the marble hallway. She hurriedly arranged the fringes, smoothing out the massive rug, just as 2 large men in tactical security uniforms appeared in the doorway of the study. "Time's up, lady." The taller guard barked his hand, resting casually on his utility belt. "Mr. Gallagher left strict instructions. You are completely off the premises as of right now." Clara stood up, smoothing the front of her black skirt, projecting a calm, icy dignity she did not truly feel. "I am perfectly aware of the time. However, Mr. Gallagher also explicitly instructed me to take my severance package. This rug." The two guards looked at the massive, faded Persian rug, then back at Clara, suppressing smirks. "That piece of garbage?" The second guard chuckled. "Suit yourself, but you're carrying it. I am a 55-year-old woman." Clara said, her voice dripping with sudden commanding authority that sounded shockingly like Reginald himself. "If you want me off this property in the next 2 minutes, you are going to help me carry my legal severance out to the gravel driveway." The guards exchanged an irritated glance, but they clearly wanted the job done quickly. Grumbling under their breath, they stepped onto the rug, entirely oblivious to the millions of dollars in gold buried just inches beneath their boots. They rolled the heavy wool, tightly hoisted it onto their shoulders, and carried it out the front door. Clara followed closely behind, clutching her canvas bag to her chest, her heart soaring with a terrifying, exhilarating sense of triumph. They dumped the heavy rug onto the wet gravel of the driveway, locked the massive iron gates behind her, and walked away. Clara stood in the freezing rain, waiting for a local taxi armed with a dirty rug and the absolute power to destroy Preston Gallagher. 3 weeks later, Manhattan's elite society was buzzing with the extravagant, reckless spending of Preston Gallagher and Sylvia Caldwell. Operating under the arrogant assumption that they were untouchable, the two heirs had wasted no time liquidating what they believed was their uncle's untraceable fortune. Preston had immediately purchased a massive, obscenely expensive penthouse overlooking Central Park in cash, attempting to plug the bleeding holes of his failing real estate empire. Sylvia, meanwhile, had practically taken up residence in underground high-stakes poker rooms, using the velvet pouches of uncut diamonds as collateral for her staggering bets. They thought they had committed the perfect heist. They thought Clara Harrington was rotting in some forgotten homeless shelter. They were disastrously wrong. Sitting in the pristine, glass-walled boardroom of Montgomery and Associates, Clara Harrington looked nothing like the exhausted, grieving housekeeper who had been thrown out into the rain. She wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit, her hair elegantly styled, radiating quiet, unstoppable power. Across from her sat Harold Montgomery, a formidable, silver-haired attorney who had been Reginald's fiercest and most secretive legal bulldog for decades. "Everything is in place, Miss Harrington," Harold said, sliding a thick legal dossier across the polished mahogany table. "The trap has officially snapped shut. The authorities have finished tracing the serial numbers on the cash Preston used to buy his penthouse, and the FBI's Art and Antiquities Division just flagged the diamonds Sylvia attempted to fence in Macau. Both assets were federally registered to the Hawthorne Charitable Foundation, which as of this morning is entirely under your legal control." Clara traced the edge of the folder, a cold, satisfied smile touching her lips. "And the probate judge. Judge Harrison was utterly humiliated." Harold chuckled darkly. "When I presented the updated codicil and the video testimony Reginald recorded 3 days before his passing, the fraudulent trust Preston submitted was immediately nullified. Preston and Sylvia are no longer executors. They are in the eyes of the law trespassers who committed grand larceny against your estate." "Then let's not keep them waiting," Clara said softly. That evening, Preston Gallagher was hosting a lavish champagne-soaked dinner party at an exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant in Soho, loudly bragging to his wealthy investors about his newfound liquidity. He was halfway through a toast, raising a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon, when the heavy glass doors of the restaurant were abruptly shoved open. 4 uniformed officers from the NYPD's Financial Crimes Unit marched into the dining room, flanked by 2 stone-faced FBI agents. The lively jazz music abruptly cut off. The clinking of silverware ceased. "Preston Gallagher." Detective Bradley Collins announced his voice, slicing through the dead silence of the room. Preston lowered his glass, his arrogant smirk faltering slightly as a bead of cold sweat rolled down his neck. "Yes, what is the meaning of this? Do you have any idea who I am?" "We know exactly who you are, sir," Detective Collins said, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for grand larceny federal wire fraud and the theft of $42 million in assets belonging to the Hawthorne estate. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Preston's face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. "That's impossible. That money was mine. I am the heir. Call my lawyer. Harrison, call him right now." "Your lawyer is currently in federal custody for conspiracy to commit fraud," Collins replied coldly, spinning Preston around and snapping the cuffs hard onto his wrists. The entire restaurant watched in stunned, breathless silence as the once arrogant heir was frog-marched out the door in disgrace. Across town, Sylvia Caldwell experienced a similarly brutal reality check. She was sitting in the VIP lounge of a private jewelry broker, negotiating the sale of Reginald's heirloom emeralds, when federal agents breached the room, seizing the stolen jewels and dragging her out in handcuffs as she screamed obscenities. The following morning, Clara Harrington returned to Hawthorne Manor. The storm had finally broken, leaving the sprawling estate bathed in bright, crisp winter sunlight. Clara stood in the grand foyer, holding the heavy brass key Reginald had given her. She walked slowly through the quiet, majestic halls, no longer a servant, but the undisputed master of the house. She walked into the study. The heavy Persian Tabriz rug had been professionally deep-cleaned, its vibrant crimsons and deep navy blues completely restored to their original breathtaking glory. It sat perfectly in the center of the room, guarding the massive fortune that still slept quietly beneath the floorboards. Clara walked over to Reginald's heavy oak desk, sat down in his leather chair, and looked out the bay windows at the sprawling, beautifully manicured grounds. Preston and Sylvia were facing 20 years in federal prison, completely bankrupt and utterly destroyed by their own insatiable greed. The corrupt lawyer who had enabled them was disbarred and facing his own lengthy sentence. Meanwhile, Clara had already begun the process of establishing the Reginald Hawthorne Medical Foundation, funding specialized care for patients suffering from pulmonary fibrosis. She had lost a dear friend, but she had protected his legacy with absolute ruthless precision. Clara Harrington ran her hand over the soft, restored wool of the antique rug beneath her desk, knowing she would never have to bow her head to anyone ever again. Did you love this story of ultimate revenge and hidden treasure? Betrayal rarely pays, but karma always collects its debts in full. If Clara's brilliant triumph over her greedy, entitled former employers had you cheering at your screen, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share this incredible story with your friends who love a perfect plot twist, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life drama.